I was very, very pleased to sponsor this bill with my right honourable friend and my honourable friend, the member for Perth and North Perthshire, and some other honourable members, because, you know, why are we here? If we can't, in this place, actually try and change things for the better for our constituents, then there's very little purpose in us being here. And this is a piece of legislation, Madam Deputy Speaker, that genuinely will improve the quality of people's lives. If they no longer have the stress and anxiety of receiving one of these fake notices, which is what they are sometimes, through the post, trying to extort money from them for simply going about their daily business, as anybody should be free to do, then we will have done a great service to our constituents by passing this bill. If it takes out some of the cowboy operators that every honourable member in this chamber knows about through their constituency casework, then we will have done a great service to our constituents. If it saves hard-pressed constituents a few quid because they haven't been fooled sometimes, as it is, into paying notices unnecessary, then we'll have done them a great service. And the Right Honourable Member for East Yorkshire genuinely, and others who've contributed, but him in particular, does deserve credit for that and does deserve some sort of reward, I think, for bringing through this bill. And I'm sure it will make him extremely popular, not only as he already is with his own constituents, I can say that, 'cause he's got a very safe Tory seat, and, but also with motorists and our constituents across the country. Now, I'm glad that the bill was strengthened today and the provisions through the new clause and the amendments that my right honourable friend introduced, and I'm sure that when it travels down the corridor to the other place, their lordships will want to look at it very closely and perhaps consider strengthening it further in cooperation with the government. But I think most important of all is that we get this onto the statute book as quickly as possible, because it will make a genuine and positive difference. Now, at committee stage, Madam Deputy Speaker, I did mention some of the bad practices. I'm not going to, as Mr. Speaker might say, dilate at length on those particular issues this afternoon, but companies like New Generation Parking was one of the ones that I mentioned, who simply don't even respond to correspondence from members of Parliament on behalf of their constituents. And I expressed the view then, and I know the Minister heard it at the time, that any code worth its salt would ensure that any company that failed to respond to a letter of concern from a Member of Parliament on behalf of their constituents really would be in breach of any reasonable code. It is simple, basic requirement, I think, of any decent company operating any kind of business that they would respond to a reasonable inquiry within reasonable time from members of Parliament. I'll give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. I think on that point he's absolutely right. Where a complaint is made about the receipt of a private parking notice, whether it be from the driver, the registered keeper or the registered keeper's MP, that should be responded to, in my view, within 14 days.
I'm very pleased that he's put that firmly on the record, and he did respond very positively in committee when I intervened on him on this matter, and I'm sure that the Minister has heard that very clearly, and I hope that those who are preparing the code have also heard very clearly that viewpoint expressed here. Also, one of the things that I think perhaps needs pondering on further, Madam Deputy Speaker, in relation to this whole area, is the practice that is now developing and was referred to by other honourable and right honourable members during the course of the debate, of parking companies using technology in order to enforce these parking notices. Now, what concerns me about this is not just the fact that they're using camera technology, but that in some cases now, and in more and more cases, when you park on some private land, in my case at St David's Hospital in my own constituency, where there's no charge, but nevertheless you have to register when you park, you are required to enter your registration number into a machine in order to have been deemed to have parked legally or appropriately in that parking space on that private piece of land. Now, my concern about this is, Madam Deputy Speaker, how is that collection of data being properly overseen? Who is responsible for ensuring that that personal data that is being collected in the form of the registration number of the constituent, who's ensuring that that is properly being processed and legally being processed? And further than that, very often, in order to get a receipt of any kind in relation to having parked on that particular land, you're expected, they don't very often don't provide you with a paper receipt of any kind from the machine. You're expected to provide your mobile telephone number or sometimes an email address in order to be able to receive a receipt in that instance, so that you can prove that you parked legally. So that's one thing. Who is responsible for making sure that the data that's being collected in instances like that is being properly processed? And it's an issue that was brought to me by my constituent Derek Donovan, who's campaigned very heavily on issues related to parking and private parking in particular. And he also pointed out to me that in addition to that, even when you aren't required to provide your registration number, but that the parking company goes to DVLA and asks who is the owner of this particular registration number, that information and the way in which that information is handed out and to whom it's handed out is not properly audited by the DVLA, if indeed it is their responsibility to do so. Only a sample is audited, and therefore we can't be sure in all cases that that data is being released to responsible people and is being used responsibly and legally. And my constituent Derek Donovan, as a result of that, has got a complaint in with the Information Commissioner's Office, and it will be interesting, and it might prove to be pertinent to the further passage of this bill in another place, if we hear from the Information Commissioner in relation to that prior to the bill going through all of its stages down at in another place. So I don't want to go on at length, because I know that we want to make sure that this bill does complete its passage before we get to the end of our proceedings today. But I want to reiterate further my congratulations to the my right honourable friend for this bill, and I wish it well in its further passage at the other end of this building.
Yeah.